Mohamed, I love your work on the, quote, generally mainstream. Long ago and far away, I would suggest that Vice President Biden was generally mainstream, and Trump went to victory. Donald Trump went to victory not being generally mainstream. How does generally mainstream fit into tonight's debate?
Well, we got to remember, when you go back to kind of the facts and the basics, anytime there's an incumbent president, the conversation, the election is always about the performance of that president first and foremost. When you look at those historic comparisons, President Trump right now seems stuck at 42% approval. That's just shy of the lowest approval rating that a president has seen in modern history to win re-election, which was President Obama, who had 49% approval at this time in 2012. Overall satisfaction in the United States is at a 20-year low. The economic confidence index that we measure every month, that's Americans' attitudes about the economy today and in the future, is at negative 16. We just saw it drop from a 20-year high at positive 40 before COVID hit. And the Wells Fargo Small Business Index that we gather, which is the real economy in America, continues to plateau in the negative. So when Americans look at their own personal lives, things remain very difficult, very tough. Those metrics don't look good for the president. But like you said, Tom, what used to be sort of mainstream or expected in previous cycles, right. I think this cycle has proven to be different.
What do they need to say tonight to sway the battleground states? I don't really look at the national polls. I don't trust them. But help me with the battleground state dynamics and what needs to be said or not said tonight.
One of the things that really need to be hit hard today, I think, by both leaders is how will the government manage the various crises facing the country? We've asked the same question for 28 years on whether the government should do more or less to solve the country's problems. Right now is the first time ever that a majority of Americans actually said the government should be doing more to solve the country's problems. We're at 54%. 56% of independents think the government should be doing more to solve the country's problems. When you think about the topics they've laid out for today's debate, the economy, the pandemic, race and violence in America, all of these are areas where Americans expect the government now to do more at a rate we haven't seen really ever since we started asking that question. So I think that'll be the first topic that'll be on the minds of both the speakers and the audience is how are you going to turn this country around?
But Mohamed, what do people identify as their biggest concern regarding, you know, if someone's going to fix, if the government has to fix the problems, what is the number one problem people perceive?
Definitely. We ask the most important problem facing the country every month. Obviously, COVID and the economy continue to be kind of one and the same at this point. But 1 in 5 Americans, 19% of Americans say that racism and race relations are the number one problem facing the country. As I mentioned last time, that continues to be a high we haven't seen since the 1960s. So first and foremost, probably COVID and the economy, but a very close second will be the state of Black America, not just with policing, but we also see with our well-being metrics, Black Americans' life evaluation has declined in the Trump years. And if that comes up, that'll be an important topic of focus as well.
One of the best things you've done, Mohamed, over the decades is the engagement of the American public. Are we engaged in this election, and what does it mean for turnout for both parties?
Absolutely. We've seen in the past few weeks, in particular, Americans' focus on the election and just political news in general has shot up. We've seen that Americans at a rate of 6 in 10 want to be able to vote by mail in November. So we definitely see people's attention shifting away from the pandemic and to the election, and a heightened interest in wanting to participate. Interestingly, though, we don't see the same levels that we saw in 2008 for critical groups like young people and others. So the demographics of the turnout will be very key this time, but it's almost impossible to predict because of that mail-in vote variable. We've probably have never seen in modern times as many Americans voting by mail and not necessarily on the day of the election than we have in the past. And that makes this election, I think, exceptionally difficult to predict.
Mohamed, do people care how much a president pays in taxes?
That's a great question, and it goes back to Tom's point originally. I think in another era, I didn't to speak to Bob Woodward in a few here, that would have been, the October surprise, the early October surprise. It's important to keep in mind that a critical part of the president's message from the very beginning was that the system is sort of rigged. And the smart Americans can sort of get around the system. That narrative has a pull in the United States. However, not with everyone, and certainly the number 750, I think, will have sticker shock to it. That being said, we should keep in mind most Americans, as Gupta just mentioned, have pretty much made up their minds. There are very few Americans at this point, I think, that'll be surprised on either side. So I don't expect it to be a game changer for this election.
Mohamed, what's more important to Americans? Is it policy or is it, character?
It's certainly outcomes. If there was one thing that most Americans sort of expect, ironically, from their president and sort of assess after their own personal approval, is how the economy is doing. That tends to be the most important thing. Right after that is healthcare. So when you think about what's happening with the economy and healthcare, in a normal election, those are the two most important topics. In this election, they only take on a heightened importance. So I think those will be the key messages that both campaigns will really zero in on in the final weeks.